Michigan.
This is a lead-headed jig. The lead on the front keeps the hook riding up so it doesn't snag on the bottom. Some weedless guards here keep some of the other weeds from catching on the hook. And this rubber skirt, oh, I don't know what it imitates, but the bass seem to like it. Bob Garner and Keith Lutz used this do-jigger in Saginaw Bay, caught lots of bass in the middle of the day, the heat of the day, middle of the summer, middle of the weeds. Show you how in just a moment. We're going to take you salmon fishing, show you a recipe on salmon pate, and a lot more. So you stay tuned. I'm Fred Trost. It's Thursday night, time for Michigan Outdoors.
Partners in preserving America's outdoor heritage.
The seagulls have their nests in the eelgrass and raise a fuss to protect their young from predators. Meanwhile, another predator moves into the weed beds, bass fishermen. Randy Lounsway steers the boat to his favorite summer haunt. Taxidermist Keith Lutz and Bob Garner are hoping to have some fast action in these weeds. These bays are protected waters of Michigan's Saginaw Bay, but don't be bamboozled by the location. The principles you'll see here can work anywhere bass live and weed beds grow. Randy manufactures a skirted jig he calls a do-jigger, which works best if it's tied directly to the line. And to give it a little extra, he recommends a pork frog dressing on the hook. Now, to a bass underneath, these legs probably resemble a frog, enough that they often take a swipe at it when it drops into the water. Very few lures are fishable right in the weeds, but a pork frog on a weedless hook or on a jig is as close to totally weedless as you can get. And in July, fish find the weeds a cool place to stay, and that's where Keith Lutz likes to fish for them.
There's two different methods of using this particular kind of lure here. Got a little bit of weed on here. One of them is pulling it through thin material, you know, the thin edges of the weeds here. And the other method is standing back off these little weed points that jut out like right in here. And where it's thin, right on the edge, you want to try to get it about a foot or 6 inches, just like that, right back into the edge of that point there, and then just picking it up and working it back through the thin part of the weeds. We're kind of going through here a little bit quick, but here's another little weed point coming out here, and we're just going to drop it right down in the back side of that. And I'm just bouncing it up off the bottom a little bit just to entice the fish to come up and strike it. And there's another little weed point right there. And that's basically what we're doing. We're just kind of working the weed points as we go along. Not that there aren't fish elsewhere, but that's the most likely point where the fish are going to be at.
Fish.
Oh, a nice one too. There we go. There, that's a better fish there.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh,
there we go. There's a nice one.
There we go.
And just like that.
Right there too.
Randy just did exactly what we've been doing.
Keith, how come these fish don't hit like every other fish does early in the morning? Why'd you say we really shouldn't start till 11 or noon?
Well, the water's so shallow in here that there's a little bit of a water temperature change through the course of the night. The water temperature drops a little bit and the fish become just a little bit slow. And then as the heat of the day builds up, the water warms up and the fish become, active and they start feeding. But it always seems to happen about, 10, 11, 12 o'clock. This depends on the day, whether it's overcast or sunny. Sunny days, it's a little bit sooner. And on the days where it's overcast, it could be a little bit later. That's in the early part of the summer, though. That's this time now.
Well, we've had quite a hot spell, and all of a sudden it turned cold too in a day's time. That's why fishing's been a little slow?
A little bit, yeah. It affects the fish. It'll affect them for a day. They'll put them down for a little bit. We still caught fish today, but...
We did go into some of the thicker stuff and use the jigs.
Yep.
And it's amazing. It is, you've got to use the weedless stuff, obviously, but you're hung up all the time.
Yeah.
Still and all, you're going to be hung up all the time.
Yep. Even with the jigs, you're hung up, and a lot of times just hanging it on a weed, if you just wait a second, that's usually when you get the majority of the strikes. It just gets snagged on a weed for a second, and just as you're trying to jiggle it off the weed, it seems to be that little bit of jiggling action that entices the fish to come right up there and strike at it. I think a good majority of the guys that fish this way catch a lot of the fish, when they're just pulling them off the weeds or they're just jiggling it off a weed. That's usually when the strike comes.
There's a fish. Okay, bring her on up.
There is nobody here. I haven't seen another boat. It's summer vacation. It's been hot weather. It's a little chilly today. Why? Why don't people fish this?
They don't like to take the time to go into an area like this that's shallow because they don't think there's any fish here. And when they come out and they work an area like this, they'll work on the very, very outside, and they go too fast. They'll move right along and they'll throw a spinnerbait here and there. They don't catch any fish and they leave the spot, instead of going through and working it first with a spinnerbait to find where the fish are, and maybe go back over it 2 or 3 times, and then go down into it a little bit deeper and use maybe a jig or a rubber worm and work it just a real slow, work a particular area right where they may have caught a fish, and then they'd find that there's more fish up in closer, to the bulrushes right on the edge, and that's probably why a lot of people don't come in. And I think another reason why some people don't come in to these areas here is access. If the bay gets rough and they're in a small boat, that may keep some of the people from coming into these areas because it's hard to get back to the access points. They have to go out into the water because it's so shallow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where some of the problem comes in with smaller boaters.
But on good days, there's no problem getting back into the... And there are pockets of these all around Saginaw Bay.
Oh, sure. There's just tons and tons of these. This is just one very small area that we're fishing today. And they're just scattered all through from Bay City, to the east, going up towards Grindstone, and from Bay City all the way up to Au Gres. There's just scattered pockets, and some of them are very large, some of them are small and insignificant, but they all hold fish.
Got him.
Okay.
Nice fish.
Oh yeah, that's a good bass. Holy catch! Nice.
Not only does this technique work every place Keith and Randy fish during the summer, but it would work where you fish too. Remember, bass go to deep water to cool off, but they also stay in the shade of weeds where it's cool. Now, largemouth bass aren't that great to eat, but they are fun to catch. And there's one more waiting for you, so get out and catch him.